Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing another deck mod roundup, I guess, because I have modded and finished modding a little pile of decks. So I did take some process video here and there, but a lot of these were decks that I edged while I was editing videos or things like that. I do have three kind of bigger projects, one that I'm going to show you here, and then two decks that I trimmed. One we already saw, so the fifth tarot that I finished trimming. We're definitely going to take a look at that, completely done. And then I have just a couple of decks I've edged. So hopefully this should be a fairly quick little video. I would love to know if you prefer these kind of, here's the collection of decks that I modded versus the sort of one by one process videos. Definitely let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to know which style of these videos you like most. Just the here's everything I did, or here's the thing I did and how I did it. Okay, I also made some bags, but like that's an always thing. So this is my first big mod project that I worked on over the last couple of weeks. This is upside down. This is the Beyond the Worlds Oracle deck, and I absolutely love this deck. I have edged it. Now, I believe I showed that in the monthly wrap-up where I talked about working with this deck. Since then, what I have done is added the keywords to the cards. So I do have some process video of how I did that. So I will add that in here and there as I can. But what I did was I went through the guidebook and I just added the keywords that are in there. So real quick, I'll show you the guidebook just so you can see what I was working with. I basically just went off this list. So in the very front of the guidebook, they have the cards, which is great, you know, the number and then the page number that it comes on. But what they also have is the two keywords that are associated with each card, like the main keywords. So I just ran off this list and I stamped these keywords onto each of the cards. So I was able to just kind of follow along and it worked really, really well. So the stamp that I used for this is a stays on stamps. So this is pretty much like, it's a little bit different than like the Brilliance ink pads or the Tim Holtz Distressed inks. It's a little bit different than the stuff that I use on my deck edgings. This, once you get it on, like it really doesn't come off. Like it's in the name, stays on, right? You can use this on just about any surface and it will adhere and it's not going to come off. So you want to be really careful when you use this. I keep this like separate from all my stamps. Well, it's not separate. It's in the same bin, but it's in a plastic bag, like a little Ziploc bag, just so that I don't get anything on it. I have a whole separate set of letter stamps that I use specifically with these inks when I'm stamping this way. But I have found that for the most part, this stuff will stick to whatever you apply it to. It will stain your hands. It will stain anything else it touches. So I try to be really, really careful when I'm working with it. But in terms of adding text to a card, this is like one of my favorite ways to do it. I mean, it's much quicker and easier to just write the cards, the names on, but I absolutely love the look of this. Oh, look, all the rest of them are upside down. It was just that first one. I absolutely love the looks of this because it like creates a visual effect on the card as well, as opposed to just me like messily writing things on cards. If I'm just making like quick notations that I want to like erase, get rid of later on, I've mentioned before I use just a fine tip Sharpie for that because Sharpie does not adhere permanently to cards. I have yet to find a cardstock that it will not eventually rub off of. And in fact, if you make a mistake with a Sharpie, you can use like usually like alcohol, rubbing alcohol, or I just use an eraser, like a plain old like white eraser, and you can erase it off just about any kind of cardstock. It works really well for that, but it's not permanent. It will fade. And it will rub off and all of that. So I love the stays on for when I'm really sure that I want to keep the keywords on the cards. And I use these little letter stamps. These ones are kind of big for such a small card, so you do have to keep that in mind. They do have smaller ones, but the smaller you get with the letter stamps, the harder they are to work with. But what I did was basically just stamp the words, the keywords, the 2 keywords onto the cards. Because as I mentioned when I was talking about working with this deck, I really enjoy working with this deck. The guidebook is fantastic and I don't mind getting in the guidebook, but I don't always want to be beholden to the guidebook. And with this, just having the title of what it is on there, that's not always enough to work for me to work with intuitively, especially when it comes to the bones. That was really a struggle point for me. Things like the hagstone, that's fine. I know what that means to me, even like a raven's claw. But like the different bones, yeah, I had no idea. They mean nothing to me in terms of my practice, which doesn't mean that I can't incorporate them. It just means that I don't already have an association that I'm working with in terms of that item. So without this having keywords on it, it became very limiting for me, or I became very reliant on the guidebook. So I just sat one afternoon, it took a couple hours, but one afternoon, watched some tarot tube and stamped the keywords on these cards. It's actually really fun. I really didn't worry about how clean and precise I was, clearly. I did make sure that I spelled things correctly, so I definitely followed along in the little guidebook. And where I stamped it on the card was kind of just dependent on where the art sat on the card. Sometimes I like where they came out better than others, but that's totally cool. This stays on, dries pretty instantly. So there's really not a lot of room for error with it. You got to be kind of sure about where you're going to lay that stamp down. And even though I kind of like laid them out as I like made little rows on my desk, they were pretty much dry within a few seconds. So I wasn't really worried about anything smearing or anything like that. I did let them dry just to, you know, give them a split second. But I really love this now. This to me now becomes a really versatile, very workable oracle deck. It was usable before, but I was very reliant on the guidebook. Now I can work with the keywords and the imagery that's on the card and then get into the guidebook if and when I feel the need to. So I'm not completely reliant on it. It's there if I want it or need it, but now this deck completely functions on its own, separate from its guidebook. And for me, that's like really important to be able to work with an oracle deck. Most of the time, there are those few exceptions. I did that whole video on like oracle decks that I sometimes work more with the book than the cards, but that's the exception, not the rule. For me, most of the time, the cards need to really function for me in a way that works in alignment with my practice. And in general, a deck with just titles on it doesn't. So I added the keywords to this, and it was so much fun, and I really, really love the way it turned out. I had already edged it, so it was just a matter of getting those keywords stamped on it. And now it's a completely usable and workable deck for me, which I really appreciate. I think the structure of the deck is really, really cool. It's just there's a lot of bones and I have no working knowledge of working with bones. So I had to add those keywords in order to make this a functional oracle deck for me. So that was probably my biggest deck mod project that I've done in the last couple weeks. Okay, let's take a look at this one really quick. This is the 5th tarot. I showed this one in my last sort of deck mod roundup thing that I had going on, my last video, and I had questions. I was questioning myself too, like whether or not I should leave the titles on because I had trimmed the 3 sides. This deck did originally have large borders. It had lines in the borders, the colored lines. They do have associations, but like I don't need that. And I decided for now just to leave the keywords at the bottom and the titles so that I would know, you know, what cards were. If I decide that at some point I know this deck well enough that I can remove them, then I can still cut them off. I have not edged it or anything, and I don't know that I will, but I'm not going to until I really make that final decision on the card titles. I'm going to work with it like this for a while and then see if I eventually want to take those off. I do really like the titles and the keywords that are associated with this deck. So like they work really well for me. This is also a case of a deck that has an extra suit. So when those cards come up, you know, it's really helpful to have the title and the keywords. The Lotus, I believe, is the extra suit in this deck. but I love the artwork. I think it's just, it breathes so much better now. I'm not so distracted by everything that's going on in the borders. It's also a much, much nicer size, and I'm really loving the way that it turned out. I'm definitely going to be working with it in this configuration for a while, because for right now, I need the titles and keywords. And actually, I think they look pretty nice. I did end up using my Katamara Pro corner rounder on it, and I just used the small because I wanted to keep it kind of square looking, and I didn't want to kind of like draw any attention to the fact that there's a little rounded part here. So I kept the corners really, really small. The only thing I haven't done yet is actually shuffle this deck. So let's go ahead and do it. Here's what the backs ended up looking like. The backs are definitely not my favorite. I don't get the neon yellow for this particular deck. I might also decide to back it at some point. But oh, it shuffles really nicely now. It is matte, so it doesn't really like squish back together very well, but it does really shuffle and bridge nicely, and I can actually get my hands around the deck now. I'll show you just in case you missed that first video. I'll leave a link to it in the description box, but here was the original size of the card. So like I cut off a lot. That was a lot of border. There was border around this, there was more border around the bottom. Not much, because I just ended up clipping off the sliver of gilding that was left on the bottom after I had trimmed it. But I really love it like this. I'm really excited to work with it. It's a gorgeous deck, and I really love the artwork. There's just something about it that is just really mystical and magical, but yet kind of like earthy and shamanic, and I just think it's so cool. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the artwork in the Vision Quest Tarot, which is really cool. And now it shuffles beautifully, and that's a huge thing. This is actually workable now. At the size it was before, it wasn't. This is the newer edition of this deck, so it's on this lovely matte, nice and thin and flexible cardstock. It's a joy to work with, but before it was too dang big, and there was too much border, and it was just really distracting. This, I think, is beautiful. Like, let's just lay a few out just so we can see what they look like on the table. I've got my stuff in the way there, but see how pretty that is now? I love it. I love it. I'm really happy with it. I need to make a bag for it though, because now the box is gigantic. Okay, so let's talk about another gigantic deck that I like trimmed a little bit. So this is obviously the Guiding Light Oracle. I don't remember if I've talked about this deck on my channel before. I know I've talked about it with my members. I really love this deck. I love the structure of it. It is like cosmic without being starseedy or woo. It is, I mean, sometimes the language is. I mean, the visuals. The visuals are all just like these cosmic images and photographs and things like that they've got a layer added over. Like there's this, I forget what it's called in Photoshop, but there's a layer that you can add over that gives this sort of painted kind of postery sort of, poster comes to mind. That's one of the filters in Photoshop. It's just been overlaid over like real images and probably some you know, like concept art and things like that. And that's fine. I'm cool with that because it's cohesive. It goes across the whole deck. But the thing I really love about this is like more realistic space stuff. So it's not like in that whole starseedy energy in terms of the artwork. The language of the cards dips into that a little bit here and there. This deck though is massive, so it's pretty thick, it's glossy. Oh, let me catch the window, there you go. Like it's super glossy. It fit in the box, like so you can see, I pretty much just took off the top. Just tried to take a little bit off the top. That's all I took off. Which may seem really like minimal. I mean, it's quite a bit of work to like trim a deck and just take that little bit off. So I didn't cut out anything off the bottom because sometimes the words got pretty close. If it still continues to be too big, I still have some room to go, but I didn't want to impede too far into the artwork. But for the most part, like I didn't really lose anything of consequence by trimming off that little maybe 1/4 of an inch. I'm terrible with numbers and measurements. I don't know how much it actually was. I just trimmed off a little bit, just trying to make it smaller because there's also a lot of cards in this deck. Let's see if it says. 68 cards. So it's a whopper of an oracle. Here's the backs. And it's really, really cool and I love it, but like it's so big. I definitely can't riffle it. It's really bulky and hard for me to overhand, but like this is one of those decks that I'm gonna make an exception for. I did try to trim it down just to make it a little bit smaller so that maybe, I mean, let's just see. I'm guessing yeah, that's still too big of a stretch for me. I can like do like the pile thing, but it's also really thick, kind of cardboardy, glossy cardstock. So like it's better. It's not great to work with, but it's better. I did also edge it. I used one of the Brilliance ink pads. If you pull it into the light, like it's got a shimmer to it. I think this one was called Starry Night. And I think it's really cool because like when you turn it into, like it's kind of black, but when you turn it into the light, like you get these silvery shimmers. It's just fun. The Brilliance ink pads are some of my favorite to do metallics with. They adhere really well. They do take a while to dry, which is a blessing and a curse because meaning that they take a while to dry, you can wipe off any excess that gets on your cards, but it also means that like you need to leave your cards like laying out flat and not like stacked up on top of each other. So that they can really properly dry. I did like, I had to, in the middle of this mod, like I had to go to dinner with my husband and some friends. So I did have to leave it and there were some smudges around. It got kind of stacked up and smudged and there were some places where it got smudged and up on the card titles and stuff like that. I was able to kind of take a paper towel and scrub it off, but like overall, like that's not my preference. I want to lay them all out and leave them set so that I can let it dry really well, but yeah. So I took a little bit off, tried to make it a little bit smaller and then edged it. And like, that's a lot of work, but I love this deck. And sometimes I'm willing to put that kind of time and effort into a deck. So let's talk about a few decks that I pretty much edged, although a couple of them, maybe it's just this one that I did kind of a little bit extra to. I also made it a bag. This is the Mouseboat Tarot as the name suggests. This deck is so stinking cute. I really wanted to like include it in my good moods video, but I don't have a deck that I'm pairing it with right now, so I'm just playing with it on its own. Anyway, like it's super cute little collage deck. Oh my goodness, I love it. So what I did with this one was really fun. I edged it in a gray color. So here's what the backs look like, which has a name on it. I wish it didn't, but it's fine. So I edged it in just a gray Tombow. And then what I did was I took let me get it. This was the one that I used. I took this after I edged it. So I edged the entire deck, like just a single swipe of Tombow gray, just to get a gray underlay on the edges. Then what I did was I took this, Tea Leaf Versa Magic chalk stamp and I took the deck in sections and I just very lightly ran the stamp along the top and then took a paper towel and kind of smudged it in there. And then of course, after you do that, like this is an involved process, it gets in between all the cards. So then you have to I did it all the way around on a little stack. And then I sat here and I took a paper towel and wiped off all the excess, as you've probably seen me do 100 times. If you don't do that, it will not only dry and get smudged on it. There's a few of them where you can see where I didn't get it off very well. It will not only smudge all over the fronts of your cards, they will dry stuck together and then you'll have to peel them apart and then it's just gonna make a really big mess. But I think I did pretty good considering like these are white borders. There's only a few places where it kind of ran over the top of it. And like with this particular deck, because it has this kind of grayish, grungy, sort of a energy anyway, like I was okay with a little bit of bleed over, but I didn't want a ton. But I didn't want to just do straight up gray. So I added, I don't even know if it'll pick up on camera, but I added just a hint of green in there and like smeared it in. And then what it does is that green kind of adheres into the places where the marker didn't fully saturate. So I didn't worry about saturating the edges with the marker fully. I just like ran the marker over it just once, just swipe all the way around the card and then use the green to fill in those areas. So it's got this like gray green kind of grungy sort of distressed look to it, which I think is really cool. So that one was a really fun one, but it definitely took a little bit of time to do because I had to, you know, be really careful whenever I'm working with these stamp things. I have to be really careful. I don't like bleed over on my cards, so I'm like pretty meticulous about wiping things off and being really careful, letting things dry, leaving them laid out, not stacking them up, you know, that kind of thing, so that I get everything looking really, really nice. So a couple of decks that I just edged in like basic colors, basic Tombow. This is my Craft Decadence Oracle, which I absolutely love. So it had, you know, it's got black borders on the front. It's got really dark coloring on the back. I hope I haven't shown this like mod before, but I might have. I know I've shown this deck before. I just took a black Tombow and colored it. That's all I did. Like one card at a time. I'm real big on, I don't do the clumpy and just mass color my decks because it will bleed in between unless I'm using like a wet stamp where I can, I have time to wipe off the excess, because as I've mentioned a million times, if it bleeds onto the front or back of my cards, I'm going to be really mad, especially if I've trimmed a deck, because then usually I've taken the borders off and I want it borderless, which means I don't want anything on the fronts. And then if my medium of choice bleeds on it, I'm like really irritated. So I mean, this was just a really quick and simple one, but like black I felt like was just, it just needed to be black. So I did that one. So this is another deck that I edged. Like it's a really simple edging, but I did it in stamp. I also made it a bag because that's what I do. This is the Crystal Skull Oracle. This is fairly new to my collection, so I've just been working with it a little bit. Although like I've got my own thing going on, but anyway, I did end up, so here's the backs. I did end up edging it, and I edged it in the Brilliance Lightning Black, I believe is the name. Yeah, I think it's this one right here, the Brilliance Lightning Black, because what it does is it's black, but there's like gold mixed in there, and I don't like trying to shine it into the really bright window lights, probably not the best, but it does give it like a shimmer, a gold shimmer. I put it pretty heavy on the corners, and then just kind of, you know, I did one card at a time, again, because I don't like bleed over, so I do one card. Anyway, but see, I don't know if it'll show up on camera. I'll have to see when I edit it, because I can't tell in the viewfinder. But it's gold. It's like a distressed kind of gold when you shine it into the light, which is just really cool. I did this one, the same thing on my Ritual Tarot, so that was a really fun one. So the last deck that I edged is one that I recently showed in my Good Moods deck pairing. So warning with this one, there is lots of nudity and lots of very bad words in this deck. So before I flip it around, just wanted to let you know. But here's the backs, and then I edged it in this like olive green color. This is a Tombow. I'll try to leave the names and numbers below for you if I can. But the reason I edged it in the green is because it has this like micro olive border around the outside. And I just thought that was like super cool to have it on the side, to have it. So it's got the green or the pink checkerboard, and then I edged it in the olive green. And then when you roll it around, you can see the olive green. See just the very hint of a border. Like, I think that's really cool. It fits the aesthetic of this deck too, so like it works really well. But yeah, that Tombow it's almost a perfect match. It's so good. I really, really enjoyed this one. That's it. That's all of them that I've done. So I did the Lame Hype Tarot in that green. I did the Crystal Skull Oracle, finished up my 5th Tarot mod. I'm not going to be able to get all these in here. The Guiding Light. I did the Mouse Boat. I did the Craft Decadence. And then the really big mod with the Beyond the Worlds. This one's my favorite. Okay, this one and this one are my favorites of all the things that I've done. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. So again, let me know in the comments below if you prefer these sort of like deck mod roundup type of videos. As opposed to the process videos, or if you enjoy both, I would love to know. So definitely share with me. As always, I'll leave links for everything that I can in the description box of this video for you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.